When billionaire Marcus Sterling shoved his 7 months pregnant wife at LAX airport, he thought money could silence her forever. He controlled her bank accounts, her medical care, even her prenatal vitamins laced with sedatives to keep her compliant. But Rebecca Martinez Sterling had discovered his darkest secret, and her escape attempt triggered a terrifying game of psychological warfare. What she didn't know was that Marcus had perfected this system on 6 other women before her, all now labeled mentally unstable after mysterious psychiatric commitments. This is the true story of how one desperate mother fought a corrupt empire, lost everything she thought mattered, and discovered that sometimes breaking the law is the only way to find justice. Prepare yourself, this gets darker before it gets better. The pristine marble floors of Los Angeles International Airport's Terminal 7 gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights as Rebecca Martinez clutched her swollen belly, stumbling backward from the force of her husband's palm against her shoulder. At 7 months pregnant, the impact sent shockwaves through her entire body as she crashed into a row of plastic chairs. "Get your hands off me," she gasped, the words echoing through the busy Friday evening terminal. Around them, hundreds of travelers had stopped to stare, their phones emerging from pockets like weapons, recording the billionaire husband who had just shoved his pregnant wife in full view of the public. Marcus Sterling straightened his $5,000 Armani suit jacket and glanced around with the casual indifference of a man who owned enough politicians to make problems disappear. His pale blue eyes, the ones that had once charmed Rebecca into believing she was the luckiest woman alive, now held nothing but cold calculation. "You're making a scene," he said quietly, his voice carrying that familiar edge that had trained Rebecca to flinch over the past 3 years of marriage. "Get up." Rebecca remained seated, one hand protectively covering her belly where their daughter kicked frantically, as if sensing the tension. The baby had been active all day, and now Rebecca wondered if somehow, even in the womb, her child could feel the danger that surrounded them both. "I said, get up, Rebecca." Marcus stepped closer, and she caught the scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the scotch he'd been drinking in the airline lounge. "Our flight boards in 10 minutes. Sir, I'm going to need you to step back." A deep voice cut through the tension as Airport Security Supervisor Janet Williams approached with 2 uniformed officers flanking her. Williams was a 20-year veteran who had seen everything from terrorist threats to celebrity meltdowns, but the sight of a pregnant woman being assaulted always got her attention. Marcus turned with the practiced smile he reserved for people he considered beneath his notice. "Officer, there's no problem here. My wife simply lost her footing. She's been having balance issues with the pregnancy." Rebecca looked up at the security supervisor, seeing genuine concern in her weathered face. This was her moment. She could press charges right here, right now, in front of all these witnesses. But Marcus controlled everything: her credit cards, her bank accounts, the prenatal care for their baby. He had made sure she understood exactly how helpless she was without him. The truth was, Rebecca had been trying to escape this morning. She'd discovered something in Marcus's home office that made her blood run cold: medical records showing he'd been having her prenatal vitamins specially compounded with mild sedatives to keep her compliant and dependent. When she'd confronted him, he'd laughed. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Williams asked, ignoring Marcus entirely. "Do you need medical attention?" Before Rebecca could answer, a crackling announcement filled the terminal. "Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 847 to Denver has been delayed due to crew scheduling issues. Boarding will now begin at approximately 8:30 p.m. We apologize for the inconvenience." Marcus cursed under his breath. They were stuck here for at least another hour, trapped together in this public space where his carefully maintained image had already taken a hit. Rebecca saw the calculation in his eyes, weighing the cost of his reputation against the satisfaction of putting her in her place. "Everything's fine," Rebecca heard herself saying, the words automatic after years of practice. "I just need to be more careful." But even as she spoke, her hand moved to the small recording device hidden in her purse. She'd started documenting Marcus's threats weeks ago, though she'd never imagined she'd need the evidence in an airport surrounded by witnesses. Marcus's phone buzzed with notifications. Rebecca could see his social media alerts lighting up his screen. Videos of the incident were already being uploaded, tagged with his name and company. Sterling Tech's stock would probably take a hit by morning. "Mrs. Sterling," Williams said carefully, "are you sure you don't want to file a report? We have multiple witnesses and security footage." Rebecca met the supervisor's eyes and saw something she'd forgotten. Existed someone who actually cared about her well-being without expecting anything in return. For 3 years, every person in her life had been filtered through Marcus's approval. She'd lost touch with friends, family, anyone who might have helped her see how far she'd fallen. "I need to think," Rebecca whispered. Marcus's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the rage underneath. "We're boarding that flight. Rebecca, this conversation is over." But for the first time in 3 years, Rebecca wasn't sure she agreed. 20 minutes later, Rebecca sat in airport security's private office while Marcus paced the terminal outside like a caged predator. Through the one-way glass, she could see him on his phone, no doubt mobilizing his army of lawyers and fixers. She'd seen this routine before, whenever someone dared to challenge the great Marcus Sterling. "Take your time," Supervisor Williams said, settling into the chair across from Rebecca with a cup of hot tea. "I've been doing this job long enough to recognize the signs. You're not the first woman who's sat in this chair, and you won't be the last." Rebecca wrapped her hands around the warm cup, surprised by how good it felt to have someone treat her with basic human kindness. "You don't understand. Marcus isn't just wealthy. He owns people, judges, prosecutors, police chiefs. He's been building this network for years." "Maybe so," Williams replied calmly. "But this is federal property, and I work for the Transportation Security Administration, not the city of Los Angeles. He can't buy us all." Through the window, Rebecca watched Marcus gesture emphatically at a man in an expensive suit who just arrived, his personal attorney, Richard Blackstone, specialized in making inconvenient problems disappear. She'd seen him work before, during the incident with their former housekeeper who'd tried to quit after witnessing Marcus's temper. "He's going to destroy me," Rebecca said quietly. "Whatever I do, he'll make it worse. That's how he operates." Williams leaned forward, her expression serious. "Rebecca, can I call you Rebecca? I need you to listen to me carefully. I've seen men like your husband before. They count on their victims believing they're powerless. But you know what? Every single one of them has made the same mistake, which is, they think money makes them untouchable. But when you assault someone on federal property in front of hundreds of witnesses, with security cameras recording everything, money can't change the facts." Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Come out now and this ends quietly. Stay in there, and I'll make sure you never see your daughter again." She showed the message to Williams, who photographed it with her own phone. "That's witness intimidation, also federal." "He means it," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "Marcus doesn't make idle threats. He's already had legal papers drawn up claiming I'm mentally unstable. If I fight him, he'll have me committed and take the baby." "Has he done this before?" "The legal manipulation?" Rebecca nodded, thinking of the stories Marcus had told her about his previous relationships. He'd always framed them as crazy ex-girlfriends, but now she wondered if they'd been previous victims. He's had 3 other serious relationships, all ended with the women having mysterious mental health crises. Williams made notes on her tablet. Rebecca, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Do you want to press charges against your husband for assault? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rebecca thought about her sister Sarah in Denver, the only family she had left after her parents died in a car crash 5 years ago. Sarah had begged Rebecca not to marry Marcus, had seen through his charm from the beginning. But Rebecca had been so desperate for security after losing everything that she'd ignored every red flag. If I say yes, what happens? We file charges for assault and battery. Given your pregnancy and the public nature of the incident, it'll make news. Your husband will be arrested, though he'll probably make bail quickly. And then, Williams was quiet for a moment. Then, you'll need somewhere safe to go while this plays out in court. Do you have family friends? Rebecca started to mention Sarah, then stopped. Marcus's reach extended far beyond Los Angeles. He had business connections in Denver, political allies who owed him favors. If she ran to Sarah, she'd just be putting her sister in danger. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Williams opened it to reveal Richard Blackstone, Marcus's attorney, flanked by a woman Rebecca didn't recognize. Supervisor Williams, Blackstone said smoothly. I'm representing Mr. Sterling in this matter. This is Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychiatric specialist. We're here because we're concerned about Mrs. Sterling's mental state. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Dr. Foster stepped forward with a professional smile and a clipboard full of forms. Mrs. Sterling, your husband is worried about you. These pregnancy hormones can cause serious psychological disturbances. I'd like to conduct a brief evaluation. No, Rebecca said firmly. I don't consent to any evaluation. Dr. Foster exchanged a look with Blackstone. I'm afraid we have a court order for emergency psychiatric assessment. Your husband filed it this morning after you threatened to harm yourself and the baby. Williams stepped between them and Rebecca. Let me see that court order. As the adults argued over legal documents, Rebecca felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in around her. This was how Marcus operated, always 3 steps ahead, always with a backup plan to maintain control. She'd been naive to think she could fight him in his own system, using his own rules. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Sarah. Rebecca almost didn't answer, afraid of what Marcus might have already done to poison that relationship too. Becca. Sarah's voice was tight with worry. I just saw the video on social media. Are you okay? Sarah, don't talk. Sarah interrupted. Just listen. I'm in my car right now, driving to LA. I'll be there in 6 hours. Whatever's happening, you're not facing it alone. Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling the first spark of hope she'd experienced in months. Maybe Williams was right. Maybe Marcus hadn't thought of everything. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as powerless as he'd made her believe. But as she looked at Dr. Foster's sympathetic smile and Blackstone's predatory confidence, Rebecca realized the real fight was just beginning. Dr. Amanda Foster's examination room felt like a carefully constructed trap. Rebecca sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair while the psychiatrist reviewed her clipboard with theatrical concern. Through the thin walls, she could hear Marcus and his attorney speaking in low, urgent tones. Now, Rebecca, Dr. Foster said, her voice dripping with condescension. Your husband tells me you've been having some troubling thoughts lately. Paranoid ideations about him trying to hurt you or the baby. Rebecca's hands instinctively moved to protect her belly. I'm not paranoid. I found evidence that he's been drugging my prenatal vitamins. I have the lab reports. Dr. Foster made a note. And where are these reports now? In my purse. Rebecca reached for her bag, then froze. Marcus had insisted on carrying her purse when they'd left for the airport. She'd been so focused on the recording device that she hadn't thought about the other evidence she'd gathered. I see, Dr. Foster said gently. And you don't have them with you. Marcus took my purse. Another note. Rebecca could see the trap closing around her with every word she spoke. Every rational explanation she gave would be twisted into evidence of her instability. Rebecca, has your husband ever physically harmed you before today? The question was loaded. Rebecca thought about the incident 3 months ago when Marcus had grabbed her wrist so hard it left bruises. The time he'd cornered her in their bedroom until she agreed to sign new financial documents. The way he monitored her phone calls and social media accounts. He controls everything, Rebecca said carefully. My money, my medical care, who I talk to. That sounds like a caring husband managing family finances and ensuring you get proper prenatal care. Dr. Foster replied, especially given your recent emotional volatility. Emotional volatility? Dr. Foster consulted her notes. Your husband mentioned you've been crying frequently, having mood swings, making irrational accusations. These are all common symptoms of pregnancy-induced psychosis. Rebecca stared at the psychiatrist, realizing that every private moment of stress, every tear shed in the bathroom when Marcus's control became too much, had been cataloged and reported as evidence against her. A commotion outside interrupted the evaluation. Rebecca heard Supervisor Williams arguing with someone, followed by Marcus's voice rising in anger. The door opened and Williams stepped inside, her expression grim. Mrs. Sterling, I need to inform you that your sister's car was involved in an accident on Interstate 5. She's being transported to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The world tilted around Rebecca. Sarah had been driving to help her, and now she was hurt. The timing was too convenient, too perfect. She looked at Dr. Foster's sympathetic expression and knew with absolute certainty that this was no accident. How bad? Rebecca whispered. She's in critical condition. The paramedics said her brakes failed on a steep grade. Rebecca's vision blurred with tears and rage. Sarah drove a 3-year-old Honda with regular maintenance. Her brakes didn't just fail. Marcus had money, connections, people who could arrange these kinds of accidents while maintaining plausible deniability. I need to go to the hospital, Rebecca said, starting to rise. Dr. Foster placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Rebecca, I understand you're upset, but in your current state, I don't think that's advisable. These delusions of persecution are clearly escalating. Delusions, Rebecca's voice cracked. My sister is in the hospital, and I'm sure she'll receive excellent care. Dr. Foster replied smoothly. But right now, we need to focus on your mental health and the safety of your unborn child. Through the observation window, Rebecca saw Marcus speaking with a hospital security guard. Money was changing hands. The guard nodded and took up position outside the evaluation room. William stepped closer to Rebecca. Mrs. Sterling, Dr. Foster has recommended immediate psychiatric hospitalization for your own safety and the safety of your baby. No. Rebecca shook her head frantically. You can't do this. I haven't committed any crime. It's not about crime, Dr. Foster explained patiently. It's about medical necessity. California law allows for involuntary commitment when someone poses a danger to themselves or others. Your husband has provided extensive documentation of your deteriorating mental state. Rebecca thought about the recording device in her purse, about the evidence she'd gathered, about all the plans she'd made to escape. None of it mattered now. Marcus had outmaneuvered her completely, using her own desperation against her. "How long?" she whispered. 72 hours minimum for evaluation. Dr. Foster replied. "Possibly longer, depending on what we find." 72 hours. In 3 days. Marcus could accomplish anything. He could move money, destroy evidence, maybe even trigger premature labor through stress or medication. By the time she got out, if she got out, she might have nothing left. 2 orderlies entered with a wheelchair. Rebecca looked at Supervisor Williams, silently pleading for help, but the security supervisor's hands were tied. A licensed psychiatrist had made a professional recommendation based on documented evidence. The system was working exactly as designed. As they wheeled her toward the ambulance, Rebecca caught a glimpse of Marcus through the terminal window. He wasn't gloating or celebrating. Instead, he looked almost sad, like a man who'd been forced to make a difficult decision for the good of his family. That was the most terrifying part of all. Marcus genuinely believed he was the hero of this story, the strong man protecting his unstable wife from her own dangerous impulses. In his mind, everything he did was justified by love and necessity. The ambulance doors closed with a definitive thud, cutting Rebecca off from the outside world. As they drove toward the psychiatric facility, she felt her daughter kicking frantically in her womb, as if the baby could sense they were being carried deeper into the trap. Rebecca closed her eyes and tried to remember what hope felt like. In 3 days, she told herself, she would find a way out. She would prove her sanity, reunite with Sarah, and somehow break free from Marcus's control. But deep down, she was beginning to understand what the other women in Marcus's past had learned. Sometimes the system designed to protect you becomes the weapon used to destroy you. Willowbrook Psychiatric Facility squatted like a concrete fortress against the Los Angeles skyline, its barred windows and institutional architecture designed to keep people in rather than welcome them home. Rebecca was processed through intake like a criminal, her personal belongings confiscated, her phone taken away, her freedom stripped with bureaucratic efficiency. "Welcome to Ward 7, said Nurse Patricia Chen, leading Rebecca down a corridor that smelled of disinfectant and despair. "You're here for a 72-hour evaluation hold. Dr. Foster will be conducting your assessment." Rebecca's room was a sterile box with 2 beds, a small window too high to reach, and a roommate who sat rocking in the corner. The woman looked up as Rebecca entered, her eyes hollow with the kind of pain that comes from being systematically disbelieved. "First time?" the woman asked. Her name tag read Lisa, and Rebecca guessed she was in her 40s, though the medication and stress had aged her prematurely. "Yeah," Rebecca replied, sinking onto her assigned bed. Lisa laughed bitterly. "Third, my husband's a district attorney. Every time I try to leave him, I end up back here. They say I have episodes." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She wasn't alone in this nightmare. Marcus hadn't invented this strategy. He'd simply perfected it. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked. "They medicate you until you're compliant, then release you back to your husband's custody with strict instructions to continue treatment." Lisa explained. "The system assumes wealthy men don't abuse their wives. We must be crazy if we're complaining about our perfect lives." That evening, Dr. Foster arrived for Rebecca's first official evaluation, accompanied by a nurse carrying a tray of medications. The psychiatrist had traded her airport attire for a white coat that conveyed medical authority. "How are we feeling, Rebecca?" Dr. Foster asked, settling into a chair with her ever-present clipboard. "Angry," Rebecca replied honestly. "My sister is in the hospital, and I'm locked up here based on lies my husband told you." Dr. Foster made a note. "Tell me about these lies." He said I threatened to harm myself and the baby. That never happened. He said I'm having paranoid delusions, but I have proof he's been drugging me. Proof you don't have with you. Because he made sure I couldn't bring it. More notes. Every word Rebecca spoke was being twisted into evidence of her mental instability. She realized she was fighting a battle where sanity itself could be weaponized against her. I'd like to start you on a mild sedative to help with your anxiety, Dr. Foster continued, gesturing to the nurse. Just something to help you relax during your stay. Rebecca looked at the pills in the small paper cup. What exactly is it? Lorazepam, a very common anti-anxiety medication, perfectly safe during pregnancy in small doses. I refuse. Dr. Foster's pen hovered over her clipboard. Rebecca, refusing treatment is often a sign of deteriorating mental state. It suggests you don't have insight into your condition. The catch-22 was perfect: take the drugs and become compliant, or refuse them and prove your lack of cooperation. Rebecca realized that every choice she made would be interpreted through the lens of mental illness. I'll take them, she said quietly, accepting the inevitable. The medication hit her system within 30 minutes, creating a foggy distance between her thoughts and her ability to express them. When Dr. Foster returned for a follow-up session, Rebecca found herself struggling to articulate her concerns clearly. You seem much calmer, the psychiatrist observed. How do you feel about your relationship with your husband now? Through the pharmaceutical haze, Rebecca tried to remember why she'd been so upset. Marcus loved her, didn't he? He was wealthy, successful, admired by everyone. Maybe she had been overreacting to his protective instincts. I think I might have been confused, Rebecca heard herself saying. The pregnancy hormones. Maybe. Dr. Foster smiled approvingly and made more notes. That night, Rebecca lay in her narrow bed listening to Lisa cry quietly in the neighboring cot. Her roommate had been here for 2 weeks, medicated into submission, waiting for her husband to decide she'd learned her lesson. The worst part, Lisa whispered, is that they make you doubt yourself. After enough people tell you you're crazy, you start to believe it. Rebecca's medication-fogged mind struggled to hold on to her anger, her certainty that Marcus was dangerous. But the drugs made everything seem less urgent, less real. Maybe she had overreacted. Maybe she was unstable. Her hand moved to her belly, where her daughter's kicks had become sluggish. Even the baby seemed affected by the medication flooding Rebecca's system. Lisa, Rebecca whispered, how do we fight this? We don't, Lisa replied. We survive it. We take their pills, say what they want to hear, and hope we remember who we really are when we get out. But Rebecca was beginning to fear that by the time they let her out, she might not remember who she'd been before she came in. The medication wasn't just suppressing her anxiety, it was suppressing her will to fight. On the second night, a new patient arrived on the ward. Margaret Walsh was 68 years old, committed by her adult children who wanted to declare her incompetent and seize control of her estate. She sat next to Rebecca in the day room, her eyes still sharp despite the institutional clothing and confused demeanor the medications were creating. They think old people are easy targets, Margaret said quietly. But sometimes age gives you perspective. I've been watching your case on the news. Rebecca blinked in surprise. My case is on the news. That video of your husband pushing you went viral. People are asking questions about why you disappeared from the airport. Some reporter is digging into your husband's previous relationships. A spark of hope flickered through Rebecca's medicated fog. The outside world hadn't forgotten about her. Public attention meant Marcus couldn't simply make her disappear without consequences. What are they saying? Margaret glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "That 3 other women who dated your husband had similar psychiatric emergencies. All ended up hospitalized. All lost custody of their children or access to shared assets." The pattern was becoming clear. Marcus had refined his technique over years, using the mental health system as a weapon against anyone who threatened his control. Rebecca wasn't his first victim. She was just his most recent. "Margaret," Rebecca whispered, "I need you to help me remember something." "What?" "That I'm not crazy. No matter what they give me, no matter how confused I get, I need you to remind me that I'm not crazy." The older woman squeezed Rebecca's hand with surprising strength. "You're not crazy, dear. You're trapped. There's a difference." That night, Rebecca lay awake despite the sleeping pills they'd given her, holding on to Margaret's words like a lifeline. She wasn't crazy. She was trapped. And somewhere outside these walls, people were starting to ask the right questions. The real question was whether she could survive Marcus's psychological warfare long enough for the truth to set her free. On Rebecca's 3rd morning at Willowbrook, everything changed. She woke to find Lisa's bed empty, stripped of sheets and personal belongings. The woman who'd become her anchor in this nightmare had simply vanished. "Where's Lisa?" Rebecca asked Nurse Chen during morning medications. "Lisa, who?" the nurse replied with practiced indifference, holding out the familiar paper cup of pills. "My roommate, Lisa. She was here yesterday." Nurse Chen consulted her tablet with theatrical confusion. "I don't show anyone named Lisa assigned to this room. You've been in a single accommodation since admission." The gaslighting was so blatant, so cruel, that Rebecca nearly dropped her medication cup. They were erasing Lisa's existence, making Rebecca question her own memories and perceptions. It was psychological warfare designed to break her grip on reality. "I'm not taking these anymore," Rebecca said, setting down the cup. "Mrs. Sterling, refusing medication is grounds for extended commitment. Dr. Foster will need to reassess your treatment plan." Rebecca looked around the day room at the other patients, all medicated into compliance, all trapped in their own versions of this nightmare. She thought about her daughter, about the sluggish kicks that had grown weaker each day she'd been on the psychiatric drugs. "Then let her reassess," Rebecca said firmly. Within an hour, Rebecca found herself in Dr. Foster's office with 2 orderlies present. The psychiatrist's friendly demeanor had been replaced by clinical coldness. "Rebecca, your refusal to cooperate with treatment suggests your condition is deteriorating. I'm recommending extended hospitalization, possibly 30 days for comprehensive evaluation." 30 days. By then, Marcus would have accomplished everything he needed. Sarah might be dead, her financial accounts completely cleaned out, custody of her daughter legally transferred. The timeline was too convenient to be coincidental. "I want to call my sister," Rebecca demanded. "Your sister is recovering from her accident and can't receive calls. Your husband thought it best not to upset her with your current situation." "I want to speak to a lawyer." Dr. Foster made a note. Patients in psychiatric crisis often become focused on legal matters they don't understand. It's a common symptom of paranoid thinking. Every request Rebecca made was reframed as evidence of her mental illness. She was trapped in a system where sanity itself could be used to prove insanity. That afternoon, Margaret approached Rebecca in the day room with urgent whispers. "There's a reporter here. She's been trying to get permission to interview patients about their experiences." Rebecca felt a spark of hope. "What kind of reporter?" "Investigative journalist. She's been looking into psychiatric commitments of wealthy men's wives. Your case isn't unique." Through the day room window, Rebecca could see a woman in her 40s speaking with the facility administrator. The conversation looked heated, with lots of gesturing toward legal documents. "How do I reach her?" Rebecca asked. Margaret glanced around nervously. "There's a phone in the activities room that isn't monitored during shift changes. 3 minutes at 7:15, while the evening staff gets briefed." That evening, Rebecca waited until the hallway cleared, then slipped into the activities room. The phone seemed ancient, but it worked. She dialed the number Margaret had given her, praying someone would answer. "Channel 7 News, Sarah Hendricks speaking." "Ms. Hendricks, this is Rebecca Sterling. I think you've been looking into my case." "Rebecca Jesus, I've been trying to reach you for days. Are you somewhere safe to talk? I have maybe 2 minutes before they find me. I'm not crazy. My husband had me committed to stop me from exposing him. He drugged my prenatal vitamins, and when I found proof, he had me declared mentally unstable." "I believe you," Hendricks said immediately. "I've been investigating 3 other women with similar stories. All wealthy men, all psychiatric commitments right before divorce proceedings or custody battles." Rebecca felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Someone believed her, someone with the power to expose the truth. "My sister was in a car accident the day I was committed. Her brakes failed. I don't think it was an accident. We're looking into that too. Rebecca, I need you to know that your story is going public tomorrow night. I have enough evidence to blow this wide open, but I need you to survive until then." "How?" "Take their medication if you have to. Say whatever they want to hear, but don't sign any long-term commitment papers. Can you hold on for 24 more hours?" Rebecca heard footsteps in the hallway. "I have to go." "Rebecca, you're not alone. The whole world is watching now." The line went dead just as Dr. Foster appeared in the doorway with security. "Unauthorized phone use is a serious violation of ward protocol," the psychiatrist said coldly. "I'm afraid this demonstrates the kind of impulsive behavior that necessitates extended treatment." They sedated Rebecca heavily that night, but even through the pharmaceutical fog, she held on to Sarah Hendricks's words. 24 hours. She just had to survive 24 more hours. The next evening, Rebecca was dozing in her room when shouting erupted in the hallway. She stumbled to her door, peering through the small window to see reporters and camera crews filling the corridor. Security guards were trying to maintain order while patients emerged from their rooms in confusion. Through her small window, Rebecca could see news vans outside the facility. The story had broken. The whole world was watching now. Dr. Foster appeared at Rebecca's door, her professional composure cracking. "There are some people here who want to speak with you." Rebecca was escorted to the visiting room, where she found Sarah Hendricks with a camera crew, a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as her new attorney, and most surprisingly, her sister Sarah, alive and looking much healthier than Rebecca had been told. "Becca!" Sarah rushed toward her, stopping short when she saw Rebecca's medicated condition. "Oh my God, what have they done to you?" "The accident," Rebecca mumbled through the drug haze. "They said you were dying. Minor fender bender. I've been fine the whole time. Marcus had his people tell the hospital not to let you call because it would upset your recovery." Rebecca turned to the attorney. "Can you get me out of here?" "The commitment was based on fraudulent medical testimony," he replied, consulting his papers. "Dr. Foster is being investigated by the state medical board for accepting payments from your husband to falsify psychiatric evaluations." Dr. Foster, standing nearby, had gone completely pale. "That's not true. I was acting in the patient's best interests." Sarah Hendricks stepped forward with a recording device. Dr. Foster, would you like to comment on the bank deposits from Sterling Tech that correspond exactly with your evaluations of Mr. Sterling's wife and 3 previous partners? The psychiatrist fled the room without another word. Within 2 hours, Rebecca was free. Though still struggling with the effects of days of forced medication. As they left Willowbrook, she looked back at the facility where Lisa and Margaret and dozens of other women remained trapped by wealthy men who'd learned to weaponize mental health care. This isn't over, Rebecca told Sarah Hendricks. Marcus won't give up. He'll find another way to destroy me. Maybe, the reporter replied. But now the whole world knows what he is. That changes the game. Rebecca hoped she was right, but she'd learned not to underestimate Marcus Sterling's capacity for revenge. He'd lost this battle, but the war was far from over. Rebecca's first night of freedom was spent in a secure hotel room, surrounded by armed security guards her new attorney had insisted upon. The medications were slowly wearing off, allowing her thoughts to clear for the first time in days. But clarity brought its own horrors. Your husband filed for emergency custody this morning, Attorney David Kim explained, reviewing the legal documents spread across the hotel room desk. He's claiming the psychiatric commitment proves you're unfit to care for the child. Rebecca's hand moved instinctively to her belly. At 31 weeks pregnant, she could feel her daughter's strong kicks, seemingly making up for the sluggish movement during her medicated imprisonment. Can he do that? He can try, but the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation undermines his entire case. Dr. Foster's medical license has been suspended pending investigation, and the state attorney general is reviewing all her previous commitments involving domestic disputes. Sarah sat beside Rebecca on the hotel bed, holding her sister's hand. Becca, there's something else you need to know. About the accident. Rebecca looked at her sister, noting the small bandage on her forehead that she'd missed in the emotional reunion at the hospital. The brake lines were cut, Sarah continued. The police confirmed it wasn't mechanical failure. Someone wanted me dead, or at least seriously injured. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Rebecca had suspected, but having it confirmed made Marcus's calculating cruelty real in a way that took her breath away. He tried to kill you, Rebecca whispered. Failed, though. I was driving slower than usual because of rain. When the brakes went out, I managed to steer into a snowbank instead of the concrete barrier. Reporter Sarah Hendricks looked up from her laptop where she'd been monitoring social media reactions to the breaking story. The public response has been incredible. The hashtag Justice for Rebecca is trending worldwide. Sterling Tech stock has dropped 40% since yesterday. Rebecca felt a grim satisfaction at Marcus's financial pain, but she knew better than to celebrate yet. Desperate men with unlimited resources were capable of anything. What's his next move? She asked Kim. Probably character assassination. If he can't have you committed again, he'll try to destroy your credibility publicly, make you seem like a gold digger who's fabricating abuse claims for money. As if summoned by their conversation, Rebecca's phone buzzed with notifications. Marcus had posted a lengthy statement on social media, painting himself as a devoted husband whose mentally ill wife had been manipulated by opportunistic reporters and lawyers. He's good at this, Rebecca said, reading the carefully crafted lies. Look how he's framing it. I'm the unstable one, manipulated by people who want to destroy a successful businessman. The statement included carefully selected photos from their marriage, Marcus supporting a seemingly fragile Rebecca at various events, medical appointments where he'd insisted on accompanying her, charitable functions where he'd presented them as the perfect couple. Public opinion is split, Hendricks noted, scrolling through responses. About 60% support you, but 40% think this is a money grab gone wrong. That evening, Rebecca watched Marcus being interviewed on a national news program, his performance masterful in its sincerity. He spoke about his love for his wife, his concern for her mental health, his dedication to getting her the help she needed. "Rebecca is the love of my life," he said, his eyes actually tearing up on camera. "I've watched pregnancy hormones and underlying mental health issues create a crisis that broke my heart. When she started having paranoid episodes, threatening to harm herself and our unborn child, I had to make the hardest decision of my life and get her professional help." The interviewer nodded sympathetically. "And now these reporters and lawyers are exploiting her condition for their own gain." "I believe so. Rebecca is vulnerable right now, easily influenced by people who see an opportunity to attack a successful businessman. All I want is for my wife and daughter to be safe and healthy." Rebecca muted the television, unable to watch anymore. Marcus's version of events was so plausible, so carefully constructed, that even she found herself questioning her own memories for a moment. "He's convincing," Sarah said quietly. "That's what makes him dangerous." Rebecca replied, "He doesn't just lie. He creates alternative realities that feel more believable than the truth." Kim closed his laptop and stood. "We need to be strategic about our response. Going tit for tat in the media won't work. Marcus has more resources and experience at this game. Then what do? We focus on the legal case and let the evidence speak. The forged medical records, the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation, the pattern of behavior with his previous partners. Truth has a way of surfacing eventually. But Rebecca wasn't sure they had time for eventually. Her daughter would be born in less than 2 months, and Marcus was already positioning himself as the stable parent, fighting to protect his child from an unfit mother. That night, despite the security guards and locked doors, Rebecca barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made her jump. Every shadow seemed to hide one of Marcus's operatives. She'd escaped his immediate trap, but she could feel his influence spreading like a web around her. At 3 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number, but somehow she knew who it would be. "Hello, darling." Marcus's voice was soft, intimate, the tone he'd used during their courtship. "I've missed you." "How did you get this number?" "I get whatever I want, Rebecca. You should know that by now. Your little rebellion is over. Come home." "I'm not coming anywhere near you." Marcus sighed, the sound heavy with manufactured disappointment. "I didn't want it to come to this, but you're forcing my hand. Check your email." Rebecca ended the call and opened her email app with trembling fingers. Marcus had sent a single message with multiple attachments, financial records showing massive debt in her name, medical records indicating a history of prescription drug abuse, and sworn statements from household staff describing erratic, dangerous behavior during her pregnancy. All fabricated, but expertly done. If these documents became public, her credibility would be destroyed completely. "The price of continued resistance," read Marcus's follow-up text. "Come home, Rebecca. Be the wife and mother you're supposed to be, or watch me destroy everything you think you've built." Rebecca set down the phone, her hands shaking with rage rather than fear. Marcus thought he could manipulate her with the same tactics that had worked before isolation, intimidation, the careful construction of reality to serve his needs. But something had changed during her imprisonment at Willowbrook. She'd seen other women trapped by the same system, met Margaret and Lisa and dozens of others who'd been silenced by wealthy men who'd learned to weaponize institutions designed to help. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for all of them. "Sarah," she called to her sister, who was sleeping on the hotel room's sofa. "Wake up. We need to make some calls." "What's wrong?" Rebecca looked at the fabricated evidence on her phone, then at the secure hotel room that had become another kind of prison. "I'm done running. It's time to go on the offensive." The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the downtown Los Angeles courthouse, but by 8:30, media trucks already lined the street 3 deep. Rebecca stood at the hotel window, watching the circus below while trying to calm her racing heart. "You don't have to do this," Sarah said for the 10th time. "We can fight him in court without exposing you to public scrutiny." "Yes, I do." Rebecca turned from the window, her decision final. Marcus wins when his victims stay silent. Every woman who's been too afraid or too ashamed to speak up has given him more power. Attorney Kim reviewed his notes one final time. "Remember, stick to the facts. Don't get emotional, no matter what questions they ask. Marcus will have people in that crowd trying to provoke you." Reporter Hendricks checked her recording equipment. "I'll be feeding you friendly questions to keep you on track. The key is to come across as credible and sympathetic, not vengeful." Rebecca nodded, though privately she felt plenty vengeful. Marcus had tried to erase her from existence, had attempted to murder her sister, had weaponized the mental health system against her. Vengeance seemed like a reasonable response. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. Rebecca emerged from the car to a barrage of shouted questions and flashing lights. She made her way to the podium that had been set up, flanked by Kim and Hendricks. "My name is Rebecca Martinez Sterling," she began, her voice steady despite her thundering heart. 3 days ago, I was a prisoner in my own marriage. Today, I'm here to tell you how wealthy men use our legal system to silence and control women who try to escape their abuse." The crowd quieted, sensing this would be more than the usual celebrity scandal. "My husband, Marcus Sterling, spent 3 years isolating me from family and friends, controlling my finances, and gradually escalating his psychological and physical abuse. When I discovered he was drugging my prenatal vitamins to keep me compliant, I tried to leave. His response was to have me forcibly committed to a psychiatric facility based on fraudulent medical testimony." Rebecca pulled out copies of the documents Marcus had threatened her with the night before. "Last night, he sent me these fabricated records, threatening to release them if I didn't return to his control. Financial records showing debts I never incurred, medical records describing drug abuse that never happened, and sworn statements from staff members who were paid to lie." She held up the papers for the cameras. "This is how it works. Wealthy abusers don't just use violence. They use the system itself as a weapon. Courts, doctors, lawyers, financial institutions all can be corrupted when enough money is involved." A reporter in the front row raised her hand. "Mrs. Sterling, your husband claims you're mentally unstable and being manipulated by opportunistic lawyers. How do you respond?" "I respond with evidence," Rebecca said firmly. "Bank records showing payments from Sterling Tech to Dr. Foster for fraudulent psychiatric evaluations. Medical records proving my prenatal vitamins were tampered with. Police reports confirming my sister's brake lines were deliberately cut after she tried to help me." The crowd stirred at this revelation. Attempted murder was a serious escalation from domestic abuse allegations. "But most importantly," Rebecca continued, "I respond with the voices of other women. We've identified 6 other partners of wealthy men who suffered similar psychiatric commitments. All had their children taken away. All lost access to shared assets. All were labeled as mentally unstable when they tried to leave abusive relationships." Kim stepped forward with additional documents. "We're filing a federal lawsuit today under the RICO Act, claiming Sterling Tech and associated entities constitute a criminal enterprise designed to systematically abuse and intimidate women through corruption of medical and legal institutions. The implications of a federal racketeering case sent ripples through the crowd. This wasn't just a messy divorce, it was an allegation of organized criminal activity. "Mrs. Sterling," another reporter called out, "why should we believe your version of events over your husband's?" Rebecca had been expecting this question. "Because I'm not asking you to take my word for anything. We have documentation, recorded conversations, bank records, medical evidence, and testimony from multiple victims. My husband is asking you to believe his carefully crafted public image over facts." As if on cue, a disturbance erupted at the back of the crowd. Marcus had arrived with his own security team and legal advisors, clearly intending to confront Rebecca publicly. The optics were terrible for him, a wealthy man intimidating his pregnant wife, but desperation had apparently overcome his usual strategic thinking. "Rebecca," he called out, pushing through the crowd, "this is enough. Our daughter doesn't deserve to be born into this media circus." Rebecca felt the familiar urge to shrink, to apologize, to manage Marcus's emotions before they became her problem. But the hotel room conversation with Sarah had changed something fundamental. She was done being afraid. "Our daughter deserves to be born free," Rebecca replied, her voice carrying across the courthouse steps. "Free from a father who uses violence to control women. Free from a family system built on lies and manipulation." Marcus's mask slipped slightly, revealing the anger underneath. "You're destroying our family with these lies." "I'm exposing the truth about what our family really was," Rebecca countered. "A prison where I was slowly disappearing while you played the role of devoted husband." The confrontation was being broadcast live on multiple networks, social media streams multiplying the audience by millions. Rebecca could see Marcus calculating, realizing that his public appearance was backfiring spectacularly. "This isn't over," he said quietly. The words meant only for her, but picked up by nearby microphones. "No, it isn't," Rebecca agreed. "But now everyone can see exactly who you are." As Marcus retreated through the crowd, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of standing her ground against a bully and watching him back down. But she also knew Marcus well enough to recognize the look in his eyes as he left. This public humiliation wouldn't break him, it would make him desperate. And desperate men with unlimited resources were capable of anything. The press conference continued for another 30 minutes, but Rebecca's mind was already moving to the next challenge. She'd won this battle by exposing Marcus to public scrutiny, but he still had weapons she couldn't counter: money, connections, and the kind of patience that allowed him to plan revenge over months or years. As they left the courthouse, Kim pulled her aside. "That went better than I hoped. Public opinion is shifting in your favor. What happens now?" "Now we prepare for war. Marcus won't give up, but he'll have to be more careful with the whole world watching." Rebecca looked back at the courthouse steps where reporters were still broadcasting, then forward to the uncertain future where she would have to rebuild her life while protecting her daughter from a father who saw them both as possessions rather than people. The real fight was just beginning, but for the first time in 3 years, Rebecca was fighting back instead of just surviving. That felt like victory, even if she knew the war was far from over. The federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles buzzed with activity as Rebecca's RICO case moved forward with surprising speed. Within a week of her press conference, 3 more women had come forward with similar stories, and FBI agents had raided Sterling Tech's offices, seizing computers and financial records. Rebecca watched the news coverage from her new apartment, a secure 2-bedroom unit in a building with 24-hour security. The images of Marcus being led away in handcuffs should have felt like victory, but she knew him too well to celebrate yet. Bail hearing is tomorrow, Attorney Kim reported, reviewing the case files spread across Rebecca's dining table. The federal prosecutors are asking for no bail, given the flight risk and evidence of witness intimidation. He'll get bail, Rebecca said with certainty. Marcus doesn't get held in cages like ordinary people. She was right. 24 hours later, Marcus walked free on $50 million bail, electronic monitoring, and strict orders not to contact Rebecca or any of the other witnesses. But electronic monitoring only tracked his physical location, not his vast network of employees and associates. That night, Rebecca went into labor. The contractions started during dinner, sharp pains that doubled her over and sent Sarah racing for the car keys. By the time they reached Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Rebecca was dilating rapidly, her body apparently deciding that 34 weeks was far enough. "The baby's coming whether we're ready or not," Dr. Martinez announced after examining Rebecca in the emergency room. "We need to get you to delivery immediately." As they wheeled Rebecca toward the maternity ward, she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure in the hospital lobby, Eleanor Blackstone, Marcus's attorney, speaking quietly with a man in scrubs who looked more like security than medical staff. "Sarah," Rebecca gasped between contractions. "Marcus is here." "He's not allowed to be here," Sarah replied, but her voice carried more hope than certainty. The delivery room filled with medical staff as Rebecca's daughter decided to make her dramatic entrance into the world. Through the pain and chaos, Rebecca was dimly aware of commotion in the hallway outside, raised voices, and what sounded like an argument. Emma Martinez Sterling was born at 11:47 p.m., weighing 4 pounds 3 ounces but breathing strongly on her own. Rebecca held her daughter for the first time, marveling at the tiny perfect features and the fierce grip of miniature fingers around her thumb. "She's beautiful," Dr. Martinez said, checking Emma's vital signs. "Small but healthy. She'll need to stay in the NICU for monitoring, but all her systems look good." Rebecca was exhausted from the delivery, floating on the endorphins and emotions of new motherhood, when the door to her recovery room opened to admit a social worker and 2 police officers. "Mrs. Sterling," the social worker said gently, "I'm Linda Chen from Child Protective Services. We've received a report of concern regarding your ability to care for your newborn." The hospital room tilted around Rebecca. "What kind of report?" "Allegations of substance abuse during pregnancy, mental instability, and an unsafe living environment. We need to conduct an immediate assessment." Rebecca looked at Sarah, seeing her own terror reflected in her sister's face. Marcus had found another way to attack, using the system designed to protect children as his weapon. "I want to see my daughter," Rebecca said firmly. "I'm afraid that's not possible until our investigation is complete." Ms. Chen replied, "The baby has been placed in protective custody pending a hearing." The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. Marcus had taken her daughter away from her before she'd even had a chance to hold Emma for more than a few minutes. "This is insane," Sarah exploded. "Rebecca just gave birth. She's done nothing wrong." One of the officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, we understand this is emotional, but we have to follow protocol when child welfare is at stake." Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling the familiar sensation of walls closing in around her. Every time she thought she'd escaped Marcus's control, he found new ways to manipulate the system against her. "I want to see the report," she said quietly. Ms. Chen consulted her tablet. "The complainant alleges ongoing drug use, evidenced by recent psychiatric hospitalization for substance-induced psychosis. Also claims you've been living in an unsafe environment with unstable associates." Rebecca recognized Marcus's handiwork in every carefully worded allegation. He'd taken the psychiatric commitment he'd orchestrated and reframed it as evidence of drug abuse. The unstable associates were probably references to the other women who'd come forward with their own stories of abuse. "I want a drug test right now," Rebecca demanded. "Hair, blood, urine, whatever you need to prove I'm clean." "We'll arrange for testing," Ms. Chen agreed. "But until the results come back and we can verify your living situation, the child remains in protective custody." After the officials left, Rebecca lay in her hospital bed staring at the ceiling while Sarah paced the room in fury. Through the window, she could see the NICU where her daughter was sleeping in an incubator, surrounded by machines and strangers instead of her mother's arms. "We'll fight this," Sarah said fiercely. "Kim will file motions, get emergency hearings, expose this as another one of Marcus's manipulations." But Rebecca was beginning to understand the true genius of Marcus's strategy. He wasn't just attacking her legally, he was using her love for Emma against her. Every day her daughter spent in protective custody was a day of bonding they would never get back. A day Emma would learn to depend on institutional care instead of her mother's love. "He's not trying to win anymore," Rebecca said quietly. "He's trying to destroy me completely. If he can't have us, he'll make sure I lose everything that matters." Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Did you really think you could take my daughter away from me? This is just the beginning." Rebecca showed the message to Sarah, who immediately called Kim to report the contact violation. But they all knew it would be impossible to prove Marcus had sent it personally. He was too smart to leave obvious fingerprints on his revenge. That night, Rebecca lay awake listening to the sounds of the hospital around her new mothers feeding their babies, families celebrating, the ordinary joy of birth and new beginnings. But her arms were empty, her daughter sleeping in a sterile room surrounded by strangers, another casualty in Marcus's war against anyone who dared to defy him. For the first time since the airport incident, Rebecca wondered if Marcus might actually win. Not legally, she was confident the truth would eventually emerge in court, but emotionally, psychologically, he was systematically destroying everything that made her want to keep fighting. The cruelest part was that he was using her own maternal instincts against her. Every moment away from Emma felt like a failure, a betrayal of her most basic obligation as a mother. Marcus had found the one attack that could break her spirit even if it couldn't break her resolve. As dawn broke over Los Angeles, painting the hospital room in soft light, Rebecca made a decision. She was done playing defense against Marcus's attacks. If he wanted to wage total war against her and their daughter, she would give him exactly that. But first, she had to figure out how to save Emma from becoming another victim of her father's need for absolute control. 3 days after Emma's birth, Rebecca sat in a family court hearing that felt more like a tribunal. Despite passing every drug test and psychological evaluation with flying colors, Child Protective Services was recommending continued custody of Emma based on what they termed ongoing safety concerns. Judge Patricia Reeves reviewed the case files with obvious skepticism. "Ms. Chen, help me understand why this child cannot be returned to her mother. I see no evidence of abuse, neglect, or substance use." "Your Honor," the social worker replied, "we have concerns about the mother's living situation and the ongoing criminal case involving the father. The child's welfare could be compromised by this volatile situation." Rebecca's new attorney, Maria Santos, stood immediately. "Your Honor, my client is the victim in this criminal case, not the perpetrator. Punishing her for being the target of her husband's crimes sets a dangerous precedent." From across the courtroom, Marcus watched the proceedings with studied concern, playing the role of a worried father caught in tragic circumstances. He'd cleaned up well for court-expensive but conservative suit, perfectly groomed, radiating the kind of quiet authority that judges respected. "Your Honor," Marcus's attorney addressed the court, "my client simply wants what's best for his daughter. Mrs. Sterling's recent behavior, the public accusations, the media circus, the federal lawsuit suggests someone more focused on revenge than child welfare." Rebecca felt her hands clench in her lap. Even here, in a court of law, Marcus was reframing her fight for freedom as vindictive selfishness. Judge Reeves studied the case files for several long minutes before speaking. "I'm troubled by this case. The evidence suggests the protective custody was initiated based on misleading information. However, the ongoing federal investigation does create an unusual situation." Rebecca's heart sank. She could see where this was heading. "I'm ordering supervised visitation for Mrs. Sterling, 3 hours daily at the hospital. Full custody will be reviewed again in 2 weeks, pending resolution of the criminal case and completion of home environment assessment." 2 more weeks. Emma would spend the first month of her life in institutional care because Marcus had successfully weaponized the child protection system against them. As they left the courthouse, Attorney Santos tried to sound encouraging. "It could have been worse. At least you'll get to see her every day." But Rebecca knew the damage was already being done. Emma was learning to bond with nurses and social workers instead of her mother. Every day of separation was a day of attachment that could never be fully recovered. That evening, Rebecca sat beside Emma's incubator in the NICU, humming softly while her daughter slept. The supervised visits felt artificial, performative, as if she was auditioning for the role of mother to her own child. "She's beautiful," a soft voice said behind her. Rebecca turned to find an elderly woman watching from the doorway. Margaret Walsh, her friend from Willowbrook Psychiatric facility, looked healthier and more alert than she had in the hospital. "Margaret, how did you find me here?" "I've been following your case in the news. When I got out of that place, I started a support group for women who've been through similar experiences. We've been watching your fight with great interest." Margaret settled into the chair beside Rebecca, her eyes on Emma's sleeping form. "That's your daughter, isn't it? The one he's trying to take away from you." "He's already taken her," Rebecca said quietly. "She's been in protective custody since birth because Marcus convinced them I'm unfit. Are you?" The blunt question caught Rebecca off guard. "What? Are you unfit? Are you a danger to that child?" "Of course not." "Then stop acting like you are—" Margaret's voice carried surprising steel. "You're sitting here defeated, accepting that your baby belongs in institutional care, playing by his rules again." Rebecca looked at her daughter, so small and vulnerable in her incubator. "What choice do I have? The courts, the social workers, the whole system is stacked against me." "The system is stacked against women who follow the rules," Margaret corrected, "but sometimes breaking the rules is the only moral choice." "What are you suggesting?" Margaret leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm suggesting that a mother's first obligation is to her child, not to a corrupt system that serves wealthy men instead of vulnerable children." "You're talking about taking Emma and running." "I'm talking about a mother protecting her child from a father who's already proven he'll use that child as a weapon." Rebecca stared at Emma, imagining what her daughter's life would look like with Marcus having any influence over it. She'd grow up watching her father manipulate and control, learning that love and power were the same thing, that women existed to serve men's needs. "Even if I wanted to, how they monitor every visit. Security cameras, electronic tags, supervised transportation." Margaret smiled for the first time since Rebecca had known her. "Dear, you've been thinking like a victim for so long. You've forgotten how to think like a mother." Over the next hour, Margaret outlined a plan that was audacious, illegal, and completely insane. It would require perfect timing, multiple accomplices, and a willingness to become a fugitive from the law. "If we do this," Rebecca said slowly, "there's no going back. I'll be a kidnapper in the eyes of the law. And in the eyes of history, you'll be a mother who refused to let her child be raised by a sociopath." Margaret replied, "The choice is yours, but choose quickly. Every day you wait is another day Emma learns to live without you." That night, Rebecca lay in her secure apartment staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept in the next room. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from reporters, lawyers, and supporters, but she ignored them all. Margaret's words echoed in her mind, "Sometimes breaking the rules is the only moral choice." At 3 a.m., Rebecca made her decision. She called Margaret's number and spoke a single word, "Yes." The next morning, Rebecca arrived at the hospital for her regular visitation as if nothing had changed. She held Emma, sang to her, and played the role of the supervised mother, accepting the system's judgment. But that evening, when the shift change created a brief gap in monitoring, Rebecca Martinez Sterling and her daughter Emma disappeared from Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. By the time hospital security realized they were missing, Rebecca and Emma were already on a chartered plane heading toward a destination that would allow them to disappear completely from Marcus Sterling's reach. For the first time in months, Rebecca felt genuinely free. Behind them, they left chaos Amber Alerts, federal manhunts, and Marcus Sterling's fury at discovering his ultimate weapon had been turned against him. But ahead lay something Rebecca had almost forgotten. Existed the possibility of a life where she and her daughter could be happy instead of just surviving. 6 months later, Rebecca Martinez sat in a small cafe in Vancouver, Canada, watching her daughter Emma sleep peacefully in a stroller beside her table. The early morning sunlight streaming through the windows seemed brighter here, cleaner somehow, as if crossing the border had washed away the shadows of her previous life. Her phone buzzed with a news alert that made her smile. Sterling Tech CEO Marcus Sterling sentenced to 15 years federal prison for racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy. The investigation had accelerated dramatically after Rebecca's disappearance. Without his primary victim available for continued harassment, Marcus had grown reckless, pressuring witnesses and attempting to destroy evidence in ways that even his expensive lawyers couldn't cover up. The testimony of 6 other women had painted a clear picture of systematic abuse disguised as business practice. Dr. Foster had flipped, providing detailed records of payments for fraudulent psychiatric evaluations. Bank records revealed a network of bribes, threats, and financial manipulation spanning nearly a decade. Rebecca's dramatic escape with Emma had initially generated criticism and legal complications. But public opinion had shifted as more evidence of Marcus's crimes emerged. The manhunt had been quietly called off, and Canadian authorities had granted them asylum based on credible threats of domestic violence. "Mama," Emma gurgled, reaching toward the sunlight with tiny fingers. At 6 months old, Emma was thriving. Her early birth had left her small but strong, and the peaceful environment of their new life had allowed both mother and daughter to heal from traumas that had marked Emma's first weeks. Rebecca's phone rang with a call from Attorney Santos in Los Angeles. "Rebecca, I have news you're going to want to hear. Good news, I hope. The best. Marcus's conviction invalidates all the custody proceedings and protective orders. The family court has issued a formal apology and dismissed all charges related to your departure from the hospital. You're officially a free woman." Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. "There's more," Santos continued. "The federal court has approved a victim compensation fund from Sterling Tech's seized assets. You and the other women will receive substantial settlements. Financial security had never been Rebecca's primary goal, but knowing that Emma would grow up without the fear of poverty added another layer of relief. What about Marcus Will, he appealed. He can try, but the evidence was overwhelming. He'll serve the full 15 years, possibly more if additional charges are filed in other jurisdictions. After ending the call, Rebecca walked through Vancouver's streets toward the apartment she shared with Sarah, who had followed her into exile rather than leave her sister to face single motherhood alone. Their neighborhood was diverse, vibrant, full of families from around the world who had found new beginnings in Canada. At a small park overlooking the harbor, Rebecca encountered Margaret Walsh sitting on a bench feeding pigeons. Margaret had also relocated to Vancouver, using her own settlement money to establish a shelter for women escaping domestic abuse. "I saw the news," Margaret said as Rebecca approached with Emma's stroller. "How does it feel to watch your abuser finally face consequences?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "Empty, mostly. I thought I'd feel vindicated or satisfied, but mostly I just feel tired, like I've been holding my breath for years and can finally exhale." "That's normal," Margaret replied. "Recovery isn't about revenge. It's about learning to live without fear." They sat together, watching boats move across the harbor while Emma dozed contentedly. Rebecca thought about the women still trapped in situations like hers, still believing they had no choices, no options, no power to change their circumstances. "I've been thinking about starting a foundation," Rebecca said quietly. "Using my settlement money to help other women escape." Margaret smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. There's so much work to be done." That evening, Rebecca video called Sarah Hendricks, who had won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative reporting on the Sterling case. The series had exposed similar abuse networks involving dozens of wealthy men across the country, triggering policy changes in psychiatric commitment laws and child protection procedures. "Any regrets about how it all played out?" Hendricks asked. Rebecca looked at Emma, who was sitting in her high chair enthusiastically destroying a bowl of pureed vegetables. "I regret that it took me so long to fight back. I regret that other women suffered while I was finding my courage, but I don't regret anything I did to protect my daughter." "The foundation idea sounds incredible. You could help a lot of people." "That's the plan. Margaret and I are calling it the Emma Foundation. We want to provide resources for women to escape abusive relationships safely, legal support for custody battles, and most importantly, early intervention before the system can be weaponized against them." As they ended the call, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been a prisoner in her own marriage, convinced she had no options, no power, no worth beyond what Marcus decided to grant her. Now she was free, financially independent, and raising her daughter in an environment of love and support rather than control and manipulation. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Emma would grow up knowing her father was a criminal, would have to navigate questions about her family history, would carry some scars from the trauma of her early weeks, but she would also grow up knowing her mother had fought for her, had risked everything to keep her safe, had chosen love over fear when it mattered most. Rebecca wheeled Emma's stroller toward home as the sun set over Vancouver's skyline, painting the sky in shades of hope. For the first time in her adult life, she was looking forward to tomorrow instead of dreading it. Behind them lay the wreckage of Marcus Sterling's empire and the lives he had destroyed. Ahead lay the possibility of healing, of helping others find their own paths to freedom, of raising a daughter who would never doubt her own worth or accept less than she deserved. It wasn't the ending Rebecca had imagined when she first stood up to Marcus at that airport, but it was better than any fairy tale because it was real, hard-won, and genuinely hers. As they reached their apartment building, Emma looked up at her mother and smiled, an expression of pure trust and love that reminded Rebecca why every risk had been worthwhile. They were free, they were safe, and they were home. Rebecca's fight exposed a system that fails countless women every day. If her courage inspired you to never give up, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that escape is possible. Your share could save a life. And subscribe for more true stories of ordinary people who refuse to stay silent against impossible odds. What would you have done in Rebecca's situation? Let me know in the comments below.